Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is about an astrologer. A man who had studied the heavens and knew every star by its name used to walk every night with his neighbor in the hope he could add to his fame. He'd stroll with his gaze always upward and tell what he saw in the sky. I figure he'd say that on Venus, the people have only one eye. Or maybe he'd say there's a planet that ought to be round, but it's square. When it's spinning around in its orbit, you'd think it's not one, but a pair. Now, one rainy evening, this fellow was getting all set to begin when he fell in a slippery puddle, clear up to the tip of his chin. His friend pulled him out with a chuckle and dried him as well as he could. You know, he remarked, you're a genius, but it's not doing very much good. Now, what's the advantage in learning the map of the heavens complete when it keeps you from seeing the problems that lie right in front of your feet? And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is about the bear and the bees. A bear on the prowl for some dinner once shadowed a bumbling bee. It led him straight to a beehive that was stashed in an old hollow tree. The beehive was oozing with honey, all golden and sticky and sweet. So the bear took a walloping handful and hungrily started to eat. The bee was as mad as a hornet. "You rascal, you robber," he cried. Then he fired from his hip with his stinger and darted for cover inside. Now the bear was the king of the rustlers. This midget was calling his bluff. So he angrily tore at the beehive and scooped out great gobs of the stuff. But the bees grabbed their weapons and rallied, and galloping to the attack, they gave him the works with both barrels, courageously driving him back. He dove in the lake for protection, much wiser than ever before. For it's better to bear a small insult than to fly in a rage and get more. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable for today is about a cat who outsmarted himself. A cat who was full of ideas, once dreamed up the best of the bunch. He'd seen some fat birds in a pine tree and decided he'd have some for lunch. So he put on a pair of thick glasses and, taking a medical bag, he called on the birds one dark evening, expecting they'd fall for the gag. "I'm old Dr. Cat," he said kindly. "I see you some cute little tots. I've come with my bag and my needle to give them their polio shots." Now, the birds weren't as silly as some are. They saw through his clever disguise, for the glasses he wore didn't cover the mean, hungry look in his eyes. "Drop dead," cried the birds. "You're a faker. We'd know you from any old place." And before Dr. Cat could recover, they'd slammed the front door in his face. Now, this little tale gives a moral, as all Mousefables should do. Watch out for the phonies. They're nothing but mischief and trouble for you. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. That father and his sons are the heroes in today's Mousefable. A father had 3 husky sons who didn't get along. They'd squabble over anything and argued all day long. They'd battle over who should get the biggest piece of pie and who should pick the TV show or wear the purple tie. Now, naturally, the father tired of all this fuss and noise, and so one day he took some sticks and gave them to the boys. "Now, see if you can break them," said the father in a bunch. Well, the boys tried hard to do it, but they didn't have the punch. The father laughed and took the sticks and broke them one by one. "You see," he said, "it's easy when you know the way it's done. Those little sticks," the father said, "are brothers just like you. Together, they're unbeatable, no matter what you do. But if you should divide them, as a quarrel does with men, they lose their strength. Remember that, and never fight again." And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. The fox and the crow are the characters in today's Mousekafable. A crow once perched upon a tree, eating a piece of pie. A fox who was passing noticed him and slyly winked his eye. "Hey, pal," the fox said cunningly, "you sure look cool to me. Aren't you a famous movie star or a hero on TV?" "You know," the fox continued on, "if you could only sing, you'd soon be on the hit parade. Man, you've got everything." The foolish crow puffed out his chest and gave his voice a try. But when he opened up his beak, he dropped the piece of pie. The fox just laughed and gobbled it, then turning to the crow, he said, "You've learned a lesson, son. Don't ever let it go. A head that's swelled with silly pride is empty as can be. You can't have pie and eat it too if you swallow flattery." Now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is about a fox and a goat. A fox, on his way to the movies, fell into a well that was dry. He tried to jump out from the bottom, but the edge was a little too high. "Now this," said the fox, "is a pickle. I've got to get out of here soon, or I'm going to be late for the movie, and I won't see the Disney cartoon." But just as he'd given up hoping, a goat came along through the wood. "I'm thirsty," the billy goat pleaded. "Is the water down there any good?" "The best," lied the fox. "Nothing better. Come down and enjoy it a spell." This sounded so cool and inviting that the billy goat jumped in the well. Now this gave the fox what he wanted, a chance of achieving his goal. So he climbed on the billy goat's shoulders and sprang to the top of the hole. "Many thanks," said the fox, "for the favor. I couldn't have done it alone." "Hey, wait," cried the goat. "I've been swindled. This well is as dry as a bone." But the fox only laughed. "Ha ha! Let me give you a word of advice, and it's cheap. You'll save yourself plenty of trouble if you look before making your leap." And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is a new version of the famous old story of the fox and the grapes. A fox had been out in the desert in search of uranium ore. He'd lost his canteen in a canyon, and now he was thirsty and sore. As he staggered upon an oasis, his Geiger counter fell to the ground, and there it began loudly ticking as it picked up an odd sort of sound. The fox looked in every direction, but finally happened to see some grapes in a fat, juicy cluster just over his head in a tree. He jumped for the grapes all excited, but they hung just a little too high. He couldn't quite bring down the cluster no matter how hard he would try. So at last he gave up and quit jumping. "So what?" said the fox. "I should care. Why, those grapes are as sour as a lemon. I can find better fruit anywhere." Now here's the point of the story. Don't be like the people who preach that everything's bound to be sour when they find that it's out of their reach. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Today our Mousefable is about a grasshopper and an ant. A grasshopper, cold and bedraggled, was bemoaning his fortune one day. He had his trombone on his shoulder, but nobody'd asked him to play. There were holes in the soles of his sandals and half-frozen tears on his cheeks, for the weather was getting quite wintry, and he hadn't been eating for weeks. An ant hurried by with an armful of groceries he'd bought at the shop. "Hey, buddy," the grasshopper pleaded, "could you spare me a steak or a chop?" The ant eyed the grasshopper sternly. "You got yourself into this mess by playing and dancing all summer." The grasshopper answered, "Well, yes." "Then don't come to me for a handout. I'm not in the humor today. Besides, it's high time someone taught you a lesson you'll learn the hard way. You can't live on singing and dancing, no matter how pleasant it feels, for you've got to work regular hours if you want to eat regular meals." And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousekafable today features this tortoise and hare. A hare once met a tortoise on a sunny summer day. "Hey, Doc," he cried, "you move so slow. What ails your getaway?" The tortoise had a sleepy grin upon his homely face. "I'm faster than I look," he said. "What say we have a race?" The hare began to laugh aloud. "You're kidding me, I fear. Why, I'd be out of sight before you got it into gear." The tortoise said, "The thing that counts, I've always understood, is not the shiny chassis, but what's underneath the hood." This made it not so easy for the hare to answer no. And so they started down the path as fast as they could go. The hare was soon away ahead, as he had known he'd be, and so he stopped for 40 winks beneath a shady tree. The tortoise, meanwhile, lumbered on, and anyone could tell he didn't have much horsepower, but he cornered very well. He passed the dozing hare, who woke and rubbed his drowsy eyes. "I've lost the race," the hare complained. "The tortoise gets the prize." Now, this is just a fable, but its meaning should be clear. You may be more successful than at first it would appear, and you can beat the fellow with a super-powered show, for it's not the speedy body, but the brain that makes it go. Now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is a new version of the famous old story about the mice who wanted to bell the cat. Some mice had a serious problem, a hungry, athletic young cat who could pounce from at least 50 paces quicker than you could say scat. So the mice called a general meeting to be held in the Mouse Union Hall. And when every member was seated, suggestions were asked from them all. So the mice started squeaking together. "I've got an idea," one said. "We'll get us a radar antenna and set it on top of his head. Wherever that cat may be hiding, he'll send out a radio wave, and we'll all run the other direction. Just think of the mice that'll save." The others stood up and applauded. "Terrific idea," they cried. Then an older mouse gestured for silence and spoke as the excitement died. "Now, I'd be the very last person to knock such a fine notion flat. But first, let me ask you one question. Who'll put the darn thing on the cat?" Now, maybe you've guessed at the moral. It ought to be simple enough. It's easy to get an idea, but to carry it out may be tough. Now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is about a little milkmaid who was always dreaming. There once was a cute farmer's daughter who daydreamed from morning till night. And once, while she did the day's milking, she dreamed that her future was bright. "This milk," she reflected, "should give me a gallon of cream, maybe more. The cream I will turn into butter and hurry right down to the store. The grocer will take all my butter and pay for it sight unseen. Then I'll buy me some new pedal pushers and go to the teenage canteen. The boys will be there by the dozen, and of course they will ask me to dance. Then I'll marry the one who is richest and travel in England and France." But just as her dream reached its climax, she tripped and knocked over the pail, and the milk made a sad little puddle all over the gravelly trail. Now, this is the point of the story. It's fine if you dream just for kicks, but never start counting your chickens before they have hatched into chicks. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable for today is about a stingy old miser. There once was a skinny old miser who kept all his cash in a sock, which he buried out back in the garden under a large hunk of rock. One night, he went out after supper to count up the money he'd saved. But someone had swiped every penny. "I'm ruined. I'm sock-rupt," he raved. "Send runners to get Sergeant Friday and call in the highway patrol. They've stolen my beautiful money, and all I have left is the hole." Now, a neighbor out hoeing his turnips overheard the old miser's despair. "Why bury your gold in the garden? You can't do much good with it there. Who wants to do good? Howled the miser. Why, I wouldn't squander a dime. Now stop asking so many questions and help me unravel this crime. Okay, said the neighbor, I'll help you. And he quietly tossed him a rock. Bury this. It'll be just as useful as money that's kept in a sock. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. That sun and wind are in our Mousefable today. The story began many years ago, when the sun first rose and the wind began to blow. Mr. Sun, said the wind, I don't mean to crow, but I'm much stronger in case you don't know. Oh, said the sun, well, that may well be, but I must see proof before I'll agree. And so each looked for a test of might, just as a man walked into sight. Ah, here, said the sun, is a test of skill. Make him shed his coat before he's up the hill. Well, said the wind, that's simple enough. I can uncloak that man with just one puff. The wind took a breath. He blew with all his might, but it only made the man hug his coat up tight. Now, said the sun, it's my turn to try. And all he did was turn his heat up too high. In quicker time than it takes to quote, the man removed his overcoat. There's a moral to this story, of course. Always use persuasion. It's much better than force. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable is about a raven and the swan. A raven who was sort of plain once met a gorgeous swan. Gee, you're the most, the raven cried. I mean, you're really gone. How could an icky bird like me become as fine as you? The swan just shook his haughty head and closed the interview. But the raven was determined. He was certain in his heart that if he lived like swans do, he would surely look the part. And so he left the farmer's field where he had spent his days and took a cottage by the lake where he could change his ways. He got himself an aqualung and dove for fish and roots. He swam around from morn till night in different bathing suits. But after weeks and weeks of this, he hadn't changed a bit, except he grew a dorsal fin, and so he had to quit. The swan came by and looked at him, all slick and dripping wet. You silly bird, the swan exclaimed. Well, this is what you get. Just be yourself and try to make the most of what you've got. It's only fools who try to act like something that they're not. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. That robin and those pigs are in today's Mousefable. Listen, some pigs once met a robin. Join the party, bub, they squealed. We're going to have a clam bake down in Farmer Jones's field. That sounds like fun, the robin said. I'll bring my crazy horn. And soon they all were jiving up and down the rows of corn. But trouble was a-brewing as they gaily did the bop, for Farmer Jones was angry 'cause they trampled down his crop. He'd planned a big surprise for them and rigged a hidden net. And when they least expected it, he sprang the trap he'd set. The robin cried, I'm innocent, and flapped his wings in fright. I couldn't trample anything. I'm little and so light. That may be true, said Farmer Jones, but then it all depends on who you go to parties with. You see, I know your friends. It won't do you a bit of good to carry on and weep, for I can only judge you by the company you keep. And now let's join the Mouseketeers. Hi, Mouseketeers. Our Mousefable today is about a wolf and a house dog. A wolf who'd been having his troubles with taxes, high prices, and such, was down to his very last wolf skin, and that wasn't worth very much. Then he happened to meet with a house dog who looked so well-fed and so trim that the wolf had to ask how he did it, and the house dog explained it to him. I live in the house with my master, who feeds me roast beef every day. My job is to play with the baby and chase bill collectors away. You know, you could come to the village and live like us lucky dogs do. Try the help wanted ads in the paper and pick one that's suited to you. But the wolf was observing the house dog, and now it was plain to be seen that the fur on his neck was all flattened, where a chain and a collar had been. "No thanks," said the wolf. "I'm a failure, but at least I'm as free as a breeze. I'll never trade food for my freedom, for here I can live as I please." Then the wolf shuffled off through the forest, but the moral is still very true. There's nothing as precious as freedom. Don't lose it, whatever you do. And now let's join the Mouseketeers.